Hello and welcome to the first video in the series on expatteachernetwork.com. You can find us, of course, on our Facebook page as well. And we are titling this video Budgeting, Spending, and Saving, and it is part of our video series on financial planning for teachers living abroad. We would like to start off by mentioning two things. First of all, that the video is part of a series, and therefore it really is best if you watch the videos in the order in which they're numbered, mainly because information in, for example, video 3 is based on things that are discussed in videos 2 and 1. The other thing we need to mention is a legal disclaimer. None of us at the Expat Teacher Network are financial advisors or experts. We are simply passing on information from a variety of sources that we have gleaned in order to help our colleagues around the world avoid some of the pitfalls that some of us, such as myself, have fallen into in terms of financial planning, and hopefully to help you build wealth and retire wealthy and at a reasonable age. So, before we start into the nitty-gritty, we do want to mention, and we will show you a list later, that we're basing a lot of what we're saying here today on about 3 or 4 main sources. There are other ones as well. And the two first ones are books written by a colleague named Andrew Hallam. He used to be a teacher at Singapore American School and has written 2 books, one called Millionaire Teacher, the other called The Global Expatriate's Guide to Investing. Both books are available on Amazon. And we highly, highly recommend that you read both of these books. In terms of our specific presentation here today, or our video, we also based a lot of this on a book that was written by 2 PhDs, Thomas Stanley and William Danko, and part of their book called The Millionaire Next Door was republished in the New York Times, and that's where we found it, as well as a gentleman named Kevin Voigt who has a blog on a website called nerdwallet.com, and we'll be tapping into some of what he talked about as well. Okay, well, in order to get started, what we need to do is to talk about these 3 things: budgeting, spending, and saving. And really what we want to do is we want to start with a very basic research question that Drs. Stanley and Danko started with when they did their studies, which is, what does a millionaire look like? Now, we're not talking about whether the person has blonde hair or blue eyes or anything like that. What we mean is, what sort of budgeting and spending and saving habits do they have? Hence the title of our video. And so let's get right into it here. We'll start with our portrait of a millionaire. These are the common features based on Stanley and Danko's research that most millionaires seem to have. Now, we do need to qualify these statistics and these pieces of data. The data was based on a study that was done in the United States. And so when we say millionaires, we really are talking about American millionaires. Whether this is true for every single country in the world, well, those of us at expatteachernetwork.com, we freely admit we didn't actually research every single country. However, it's still an interesting test case, as the United States is the largest economy in the world. I myself am not American. I don't live in the United States. I live in the EU. So it's possible that some of what we're saying might not statistically be true everywhere in the world. However, we think the stats are still interesting and provide us a good insight. So you can see our bullet points that are listed here. The first one that I find interesting is that 2/3 of all American millionaires are self-employed. But these businesses are not what you might expect. When I first read this, I thought, oh, these are the Bill Gateses of the world and Googles and Yahoos and people running high tech and Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook. And in fact, no. Most of these businesses are not high tech. Most American millionaires own very simple, boring, from another way to describe it, is old economy businesses, things like mobile home parks and waste disposal companies, construction companies, things that really are not high tech at all. The average income of American millionaires is $247,000. Now, what we mean by income, let's be clear, we mean the amount of money that these millionaires earn and are taxed upon in a given year. And the 247 might not sound like a lot, but of course we have to remember how millionaires calculate their wealth, or how anybody's wealth is calculated. It does include things like homes, cars, and other large assets that would be factored into your wealth. And what's also true to say is that statistic, plus the next one that you see, the average wealth is $3.7 million of all millionaires in the United States. Well, This is not obviously a number that would be assigned to somebody like, say, a Donald Trump or a Warren Buffett. However, those people are included in these stats because they are above the magic threshold of $1 million. And so it does tend to skew the statistics a lot. So we shouldn't walk away thinking that all millionaires in the United States have $3.7 million worth of wealth. The actual median, the 50th percentile, is only 1.6 million. Well, I say only. That's still a pretty doggone good amount of wealth to build, but it's perhaps maybe not what we think of when we think of millionaires. Often the picture we have is people that are driving in fancy luxury cars, wearing $5,000 Rolex watches, owning tailor-made suits, and perhaps, their name is Rockefeller or Kennedy or Getty or some other old money name whereby they've inherited their wealth. And the truth is that that's not true. 80% of all US millionaires did not inherit their wealth. They are, in fact, self-made. Other interesting statistics are that millionaires in the United States live on less than 7% of their wealth. Very small percentage. And understand what we mean by this. We mean that of all the wealth that they own, what they actually spend in a given year, what they actually need to fulfill their financial needs and wants, is only 7%. But the other interesting fact is that these millionaires are avid investors, that 15 to 20% of their annual income is put into the markets, stocks, bonds, other things. We'll talk in subsequent videos about more specifically about which investments are better than others and which financial advisors are better than others. And we'll base a lot of those recommendations, again, on our colleague Andrew Hallam's books and other research that we've found. But one interesting fact is to note that the majority of US millionaires invest independently. In other words, they don't use a financial advisor. They make the decisions on their own. And they are not big spenders. These are, in fact, not the people that drive the fancy luxury sports cars and own the Rolex watches. In fact, in many cases, their lifestyles would be very, very surprising to people. They don't project a lot of wealth as they go through their lives day to day. Well, when we were looking at our research to make up this video, we came across a blog on nerdwallet.com by a gentleman named Kevin Voigt, and he listed the 8 habits of millionaires. Now, you can read the list of 8 for yourself. They're all right there. We're going to focus, actually on all 8, but we're going to focus perhaps a little bit more on some specifics, specifically about budgeting, which is really number 1, and number 4, live below your means. And also we want to make a final comment on number 8, money is the byproduct, not the goal. So let's get into it and see some specifics. So if we talk about budgeting breakdown, how exactly should people allocate their money month to month, and how do most millionaires allocate their money month to month? Well, what research shows is that the majority of millionaires track their spending daily and monthly. They're very careful about what they spend, and they're very careful about keeping what they spend organized and knowing how much are they spending on food, how much are they spending on clothes, etc., etc. Now, I admit, me personally, I'm not a millionaire. I'm far from it, but I do this as well, and I really think it's very important. And these days, it's actually rather easy. In my case, I use an app on my smartphone. I have a Samsung Android smartphone, and I use an app called Expense Manager. I admit I've not owned the app for a very long time, and there are certainly features of it that I haven't learned yet. And there are certainly features that if I were the designer of the app, I would have done differently, but it works as well as anything else, and it certainly is easy to get started. There are multiple apps available for iPhone and Android that will do this, and it's quite handy to have it on the smartphone. And if you're at the gas station buying gas, or at the grocery store buying groceries, or out to dinner with friends, and you spend money, you simply tap it into your smartphone right away while it's still fresh in your memory, and the app keeps track of it all for you. It will even, in Expense Manager, it will even categorize it for you. It will allow you to input standing monthly costs and quarterly costs and annual costs and all kinds of other things. Well, beyond that, one of the things that we found in our research in making this video is that many analysts and many experts, for lack of a better word, recommend a 50-30-20 rule. 50% needs, 30% wants, 20% investments. And what that means is this: your monthly income should break down in roughly those percentages, that half of your monthly net income, not gross, should be spent on things that you need to have. your rent, or if you own your own home, a mortgage, your utilities, your electricity, your water, your heat, food costs, groceries, etc. Everything that is required for you to simply put basic food and shelter, or shelter over your roof over your head, and food on the table. And then the next portion is 30%, and we use some examples here: clothes, cars, stereos. Now I know clothes are actually, you could argue that that's not a want, that's a need, but we put it into wants, because we figured that, well, to a large extent, when you buy clothes and what kind of clothes you buy, how expensive they are, whether you buy fancy designer brand names or whether you buy knockoffs, etc., that is to a large extent a personal choice. And so we felt it was more accurate to put that in the wants category. And certainly those two categories can sometimes overlap. If your car breaks down and you have to have a new car because you have to drive to work, there really isn't any other viable option, then that doesn't really feel like much of a want. But still, for the most part, we believe that those things belong in that wants category. And that leaves us with the last 20%. And this is the percentage that we recommend, or that most experts recommend goes into investments, stocks, bonds, etc., etc. And as I said, in subsequent videos, we'll talk more specifically about what vehicles are best and what vehicles are best to avoid high commissions, so that you end up with the bulk of the profit and not some financial advisor or some mutual fund company, etc., etc. So there's one final stat that I want to share with you, because I found it really interesting when I discovered it. It was during the research for this video, where we discovered a stat that said if every person that started at the age of 25 and saved $100 a month, and they did this every month until they were 65 years of age, and they managed to gain 12% return a year, that by the age of 65, they would have over $1.1 million. And the conclusion of this person who compiled this statistic was, this means that everybody should be able to retire a millionaire. Well, okay, I know there are some limits to this argument. For example, 12% a year, especially in today's market, may be a bit optimistic if we believe what we see or read in books like Millionaire Teacher from Andrew Hallam. And statistically, this is borne out. He's done his research very well, that over the last 90 to 100 years, the stock markets tend to average about 10% a year, not 12. However, it's still a really interesting stat. What it basically means is that the average person makes more than enough money in their lifetime to be able to retire financially independent and wealthy. It's simply a matter of not managing that money, not budgeting that money properly. Well, anyway, so let's move on and talk about spending habits. How do millionaires spend their money, and how is this perhaps different than the so-called pretenders, the people that are wearing the fancy clothes and driving the fancy cars? Well, one of the things that statistically seems to be true is that millionaires are very organized and very goal-oriented when it comes to their spending. They love to make to-do lists. 81% of millionaires are to-do lists makers, according to Stanley and Danko. And this is a really interesting statistic, because it basically means that what these millionaires are doing is engaging in sensible spending, or if we look at point 4 of Kevin Voigt's list of 8, living below your means. So one example is transportation, cars. Millionaires in the United States rarely, if ever, buy brand new luxury cars. The most popular brand amongst US millionaires of car? Toyota. Yes, Toyota is a Japanese, not an American make. However, Toyota's been assembling and building cars in the United States and in Canada for a long, long time. And certainly price-wise, Toyota is not BMW or Mercedes. In fact, according to Andrew Hallam, the average price of the cars driven by US millionaires, $31,000. That's it. Certainly not the $250,000 brand new Rolls Royce or Jaguar that you might expect from somebody that has a lot of money. Millionaires in the U.S. rarely, if ever, buy new cars, and they definitely never lease cars. They tend to buy cars that are 2 to 3 years old. Now, I admit, I live in the European Union. This is what I do as well. In the country where I live, if a car is purchased brand new, it doesn't need to be recertified for 3 years. And after that, it's every 2 years. So surprise, surprise, there's always a glut of 3-year-old used cars on the market. These are the ones I buy. Why? let somebody else pay the depreciation. We all know that if you pay $35,000 for a car, the minute you drive it off the lot, it's usually worth 18, 22, 25, and that's money you'll never see again. Well, why do that yourself? Why not let somebody else pay that depreciation? And it's also sensible spending is about being realistic about what you need. And here's the example. It's in our bullet point here, and I absolutely love this example. Warren Buffett, the famous Oracle of Omaha, the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most successful corporations ever, lives in a house in Omaha that he bought for $31,500 in 1958. And if you ask Warren Buffett, why doesn't he buy a big mansion? His answer is simple. I don't need the space. I don't need a house that big. All those bills, all that hassle, and why? The house I live in is perfectly fine. It puts a roof over my head. The walls don't fall down. And it's perfectly fine for what I need. Here in my home country of Canada, I remember as a young man reading a book called The Wealthy Barber and seeing him in later years do a television interview where he said his house is only 1,200 square feet and he has a room in his house that he never uses. And it's all about living below your means. That sounds bad, but it's actually not very difficult at all. It simply means don't spend ostentatiously. Don't go out and buy the luxury brand new sports car that you don't really need. Okay, anyway, so what else can we say about millionaires and the other things that are typical of their lifestyle? Well, we've mentioned that two-thirds of millionaires in the United States are entrepreneurs. And this is one of Kevin Voigt's rules, work for yourself. Well, that's a great thing. If you can start your own business and make it successful, this is wonderful. And this is related to our second bullet point there, sensible risk-taking and resilience. That, in fact, one feature of millionaires seems to be that they're willing to take risks, but that they don't do this willy-nilly, that these risks are calculated, but that also they save and spend knowing that life has a nasty habit of throwing you curveballs around every corner, and that if you're not prepared for emergencies, the financial impact upon you can be devastating. And so they save properly, they invest their money wisely so that they can weather stock market crashes and other unforeseen events. And again, we'll talk in subsequent videos about how to protect yourself as best you can against things like this. Well, one of the other lifestyle tips that millionaires seem to have is that they hang out with other millionaires. They socialize with people that are like them. And this might seem a bit schmoozy. It might not even be possible. Even the entrepreneurship can, for many people, be very difficult. It's very daunting to start your own business. Most of us prefer the steady paycheck. That's certainly the way I earn most of my income, not from my own business. And with hanging out with millionaires, it can, however, be of great benefit as you're simply hanging out with people who have done it already, have built wealth successfully, and you're picking their brain and listening and learning. And most people are usually quite generous about this, and it's not a problem. But the last thing we do want to say about this is that building wealth is about independence and freedom and not about having money. It's important to understand that saving and spending and budgeting is not about creating a pile of cash that you wade through barefoot in your living room. It's about setting yourself up to be able to have choices. Do you want to travel more? Do you want to spend more time with your family and maybe go part-time at your job instead of full-time? Do you want to retire earlier? All of these choices are available to you if you can build wealth. If you can't, then they're not. And so it's important to understand it's not simply about accumulating money. It's about accumulating options for yourself. And with options comes independence and freedom. Okay. Well, anyway, that's our presentation on budgeting, spending, and saving. And as promised, we will flash up here our sources. There's our two books from our colleague, Andrew Hallam, Millionaire Teacher, Global Expatriate's Guide to Investing. As we said, they're available on Amazon. We highly recommend them. They're each about $20, $25 US, something like that. And the last two, The Millionaire Next Door by the Stanley and Danko study and Kevin Voigt's blog, 8 Habits of Self-Made Millionaires, are available free online. And those are the URLs right there. So that's our first of our presentation. We would like to say thank you. We would like to encourage all of you to come and join us at expatteachernetwork.com. We also have a Facebook page that you're welcome to join, and hopefully we'll see you there. And hopefully we'll see you again for subsequent issues of our video series here on financial planning. We'll be having other video series as well, so look out for those. And We'll see you next time, and until then, happy wealth building.